had continued to see creation of states from 12 to 17 to 19 and presently to 36, and of course the federal, including the federal capital territory. We went over to structure of the Nigerian federalism. We equally talked about problems of Nigerian federalism, where we mentioned revenue allocation and of course issues concerning the minority group and the majority group domination over the minority group. We talked about constitutional conferences with focus on the London Constitutional Conference of 1953 and of course the Lagos Constitutional Conference of 1954, which was meant to address some of the issues that were not properly taken care of in the London Constitutional Conference. Of course, the London Constitutional Conference was meant to address some of the lapses in the Macpherson Constitution. We actually talked about revenue allocation formula in Nigeria, which led us to discuss a whole number of revenue allocation proposal, about 9 of them, the Czechs constitutional proposal, revenue allocation proposal, the Hillimson, and a whole lot of them, about 9 of them. And the next topic we talked about was the inter-ethnic rivalry and the issue of succession in Nigeria. Of course, we did mention that the Northerners actually wanted to succeed when Anthony and Ahoro in 1956 made a proposal for self-government that was supposed to take place in 1956. The Northerners actually were opposed to such idea because they did not believe Nigeria was ripe enough to govern itself, and that almost led to their succession. And of course, the Westerners equally threatened to succeed when Lagos was separated from the Western region. They threatened to succeed. And of course, the threat of succession that was carried out was that of the Igbos in the year about 1967, who actually announced a republic, that's the Republic of Biafra. That was a threat of succession that actually was carried out. And ever since then, there has been skirmishes here and there, inter-ethnic rivalry among the the 3 major ethnic groups, the Yorubas, the Hausas, and the Igbos. Of course, such threats, both the ones carried out and the ones not carried out, actually threaten to a very large extent the corporate unity of Nigeria. We talked about the development of political parties in Nigeria, where we said that political parties in Nigeria today developed from some of the cultural organizations, cultural groups that were hitherto used to articulate the interest of the masses. The Jamia Mutanem Arewa, from where we got the NPC party, and of course the Egbe Omo Oduduwa cultural organization, from where we finally got the AG, that's the Action Group Party. Of course, we did say that some of these political parties were not national in outlook, because the NPC had avalanche of the Hausa Fulanis as members of the party. The AG, we had a good number of the Yorubas, and of course in the NCNC, we had a good proportion of the Igbos. So some of these political parties never had national outlook as they claim. And of course, like we said, this was one of the reasons the unity of Nigeria was threatened, and of course the military felt that they needed to come in and save the nation. And of course that was what led to the military taking over power from the civilians, including other issues we discussed. We went into into major political crisis in Nigeria, and the Kano riot of 1953. Of course, we talked about the census crisis of 1962, which equally in a way extended to 1963. And of course, political crisis in the AG party between Akintola and of course his deputy. These were some of the major political crises we discussed in Nigeria. We equally discussed military rule in Nigeria, stipulating that the first military coup was in 1966, January 15. We equally established that military rule is not peculiar to the Nigerian society. That was what led us to talk about military rule in Egypt, in Togo. Of course, we did say that some of this military takeover rubbed off on the Nigerian society, which actually led one of the reasons Nigeria experienced. Of course, we said that had about 8 attempts to usurp power from the civilians, and about 5 were successful, and the other 3 were not successful. But of course, they were bloody, like the one that led to the death of Murtala Muhammad, which actually led to Obasanjo taking over power. We talked about conflict resolution and management, where we discussed the difference between conflict and, of course, peace. We said that conflict has to do with a period of altercation, period of war, period of struggle. That's what we define as conflict, and peace is the absence, not absolute absence, but at least the absence of war. Okay, so we talked about conflict. We talked about how to resolve conflict. That conflict can be resolved when the conflicting issue is brought to bear, and of course when the conflicting members are brought to table to express their views on the matter that is conflicting. And we talked about types of conflict resolution, how conflict can be properly managed. Finally, we talked about we talked about interdependence of nations, where we established that nations can no nation can stand on its own without depending one on the other. So that was what led us into talking about a number of international organizations, which I am going to get to very soon. We talked about Nigerians' foreign policy. Now, what are these foreign policy? We did say that foreign policy has to do with the strategy or plan that the government of a particular nation or policymakers embark upon to maintain their international relationship and, of course, to achieve national interest. We talked about the issue of non-alignment, which we said is another word for neutrality. That is the situation, that the movement where Africans, or of course Asians, decided not to take side with either the Western Bloc or the Eastern Bloc, instead to prefer to suggest roundtable discussion over issues instead of taking a military step to solve crisis. We talked about international organizations, talked about the United Nations organization, and but before that, we did mention that the United Nations organization came after the League of Nations failed. We did talk about how the international UN was established in 1945, and of course some of the organs under the United Nations organization. Then we talked about the OAU, talked about the Economic Community of West African States, and these are some of the political international organizations we talked about. Then we talked about the Millennium Development Goals, mentioning about 8 Millennium Development Goals. Goals which include equality, the sustenance of equality, achieving equality between the male folks and the female folks, basic primary education for pupils and students, and all of that. We did mention that some of these goals are yet to be properly met, and of course, as we hear recently, the Millennium Development Goals is being substituted with the SDP now, no longer SDGs, no longer the MDGs, as if the MDGs have failed. But of course, they made some impact. We talked about the new economic partnership for economic development as in NEPAC. Finally, we talked about that before the last one. We talked about e-government, that's electronic government, and how, of course, the government of the day has been properly taken care of with the introduction of electronic way of going about some of the jobs that would have taken a very long time to execute. So with the introduction of e-government, things are better done and faster too. Finally, we talked about leadership and followership. We did say that followership is the flip side of leadership. And of course, we mentioned some of the qualities of a good leader, and of course, some of the qualities of a good follower. These are some of the things we discussed in our class, and I'm sure you remember all of them. I am sure with what we have gotten from this class, we are prepared for exams. And of course, with some of the things you're supposed to do, we may not be able to say all there is to say, but with what we have said, with what you have heard, it is very clear that you can prepare for your exam and of course make the best out of it. Thank you very much.